The rain had been falling since before dawn, and by the time the Greyhound pulled out of Knoxville, the windows were nothing but gray streaks and blur. I had a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold somewhere around mile 40, a carry-on bag that needed new wheels, and a ticket I had bought 3 weeks in advance because the early bird fare was $11 cheaper. My son always said I was the cheapest man alive. He said it like it was an insult. I took it like a compliment. Tell me something in the comments. Has your family ever made you feel like a burden for simply showing up? Because I need to know if I am the only one. My name does not matter much to this story. What matters is that I am 64 years old, that my left knee sounds like gravel in a tin can when the weather turns cold, and that I had not seen my grandchildren in 7 months. 7 months. I had counted. My granddaughter Emma had started kindergarten without me in the audience. My grandson Cooper had lost his first tooth without me there to put $1 under his pillow. Those were not small things to a man who had nothing left but time and the people he loved. My wife, Margaret, passed 4 years ago this November. Pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end, and she spent 6 of those 8 weeks worrying about everyone else. That was who she was. She made me promise 2 things before she went. She made me promise to get my cholesterol checked every year, and she made me promise to stay close to our son and his family. I had kept both promises. The cholesterol one was easier. My son lived in a suburb outside of Nashville with his wife and their 2 kids. He was 37, worked in finance, drove a German car that cost more than my first house, and called me on Father's Day and my birthday, sometimes. His wife was polite the way a hotel front desk is polite. Efficient, correct, not warm. I had tried for years to find the door into her, the place where real conversation lived, but she kept it locked, and I had stopped knocking. I did not tell them I was coming by bus. My son knew I was coming for Thanksgiving, but he assumed I would fly the way I always used to fly, back when I was still running the company. Back then I had a preferred status on Delta and a carry-on with wheels that actually worked. That was before I sold everything and moved back to the small house in Knoxville where Margaret and I had started out. People thought I was grieving, simplifying, going through something. They were not wrong, but there was more to it than that, and I was not ready to explain it to anyone yet. The bus ride was 9 hours, with 1 transfer in Chattanooga. I had brought a paperback novel and a sandwich in a plastic bag, and I had slept for maybe 2 of those hours, my forehead resting against the cold glass, watching the Tennessee hills go dark, and then the flatlands of Middle Tennessee come up pale and wet on the other side. My knee ached the whole way. I did not complain, even to myself, because Margaret would have told me complaining about pain you chose was a waste of a perfectly good breath. I arrived at the Nashville bus terminal at just past 4 in the afternoon on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. My son was supposed to pick me up at the airport at 6. I had not corrected the misunderstanding, because I thought it would be a nice surprise, showing up early, maybe helping with the cooking, maybe getting an hour with Emma and Cooper before dinner and bath time swallowed the evening. I called a cab from the terminal. It cost $32. I tipped the driver $5. The house was large the way houses in that neighborhood were large, which was to say, it was large not because the family needed the space, but because the neighborhood required it. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a yard with a stone patio my son had put in 2 summers ago and mentioned in every phone call for 6 months afterward. There were cars in the driveway I did not recognize, which surprised me. My son had not mentioned guests arriving early. I paid the cab driver and stood on the front walk for a moment, looking up at the lit windows. Through the front room window I could see movement, people, the blue flicker of a television. The rain had settled into a mist, and my jacket was not quite up to the job. My knee was talking to me steadily now, the way it always did after sitting still for too long. I picked up my bag and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. I knocked twice out of habit and then turned the knob and stepped into the foyer. The house was warm and smelled like something good, roasting and herbed, coming from the kitchen. I could hear voices from the back of the house, 2 or 3 people talking, and from upstairs the sound of cartoons, which meant Emma and Cooper were home. I smiled at that. I actually stood in the foyer and smiled at the sound of cartoon voices coming through the ceiling. I set my bag down and was about to call out when I heard my son's voice from the kitchen. not the voice he used with me. A different one. Flatter. Harder around the edges. He's not going to just hand it over. You know how he is. I stopped. My daughter-in-law's voice came back, quieter but clear. The kitchen was just around the corner from the hallway, and the door was half open. Then we go through the trust attorney. That's what Diane said. If we can establish that he's not managing it responsibly, we petition for oversight. It's not a conservatorship. It's just oversight. It sounds less aggressive. He sold his company for $83 million, and he rides a bus to visit us. Tell me that doesn't sound like impaired judgment. I heard her laugh, short and dry. That's exactly the kind of thing Diane said we should document. The truck, the bus, the way he lives in that little house. It builds a picture. My son said something I did not catch, and then she said, louder, I'm not waiting until he decides to give it all to some charity because it's what Margaret would have wanted. Margaret is dead. We are alive. Emma and Cooper are alive. This family deserves that money more than a donor wall somewhere. I stood in the hallway of my son's house with my coat still on and rain still drying in my hair, and I felt something happen inside me that I can only describe as a door closing, not slamming. Closing, quietly, with a click. I had built a company from a 1,200-square-foot office and 2 employees and 30 years of 7-day weeks. I had put my son through a good school and a better graduate program, and I had given him the down payment on this house without being asked and without expecting thanks. I had held his hand in the hospital the night Cooper was born, and I had driven through a February ice storm to be there when Emma came home for the first time. I had done all of it because I loved him, because he was my son, because Margaret and I had made him together and everything we built was built with him somewhere in the plan. And he was in his kitchen, with his wife and someone named Diane who was apparently an attorney, building a case that his father had lost his mind because his father rode the bus. I did not walk into that kitchen. I stood where I was and I breathed very slowly and I thought about Margaret, who would have told me to be careful right now because anger makes you stupid and stupid is permanent. So I breathed, and I thought, and then I walked quietly back to the foyer, and I picked up my bag. And then I heard small feet on the stairs. Emma came around the bottom of the staircase in her socks. Hair in 2 uneven ponytails, the way she always did them herself, because she had decided at age 5 that she was old enough. She saw me, and her whole face changed the way only a child's face can change, like someone turned a light on behind it. "Grandpa," she said, not loud, just certain. "The way you say a word you are very sure of." I put my bag down again and crouched, knee and all, and she ran the last 6 feet into me and I held her and pressed my face into her hair and she smelled like the children's shampoo with the yellow label that Margaret had always bought. I did not know if her parents still bought that brand or if it was a coincidence. It did not matter. "You're early," she whispered into my shoulder. "I took the fast route," I told her. She pulled back and looked at me with Margaret's eyes, the exact same shape, and said, "Are you staying a long time this time?" I said, "We'll see, sweetheart." Cooper appeared at the top of the stairs, assessed the situation, and came down at a controlled run in the way of 6-year-old boys who have been told not to run on stairs and have found a technical middle ground. He hit me at knee height and I absorbed it and held them both, and for that minute, the kitchen and the conversation and the attorney named Diane did not exist. My son appeared in the hallway doorway. He saw me and I watched the sequence of things that crossed his face. Surprise, then a flash of something uncomfortable, then the performed warmth that I now understood was a performance. "Dad, you're early. I was going to pick you up at flu standby," I said. "Caught an earlier connection. Didn't want to bother you with the change." I smiled at him, the way a man smiles when he is buying time. "Something smells good." He recovered fast. He had always been quick on his feet, my son. I had admired that about him once. "Claudia's been cooking all afternoon. Come in, come in." He took my bag, which he had never done before in his life, and I noticed it and filed it away. Dinner that night was the 4 of us plus 2 couples I was introduced to as neighbors, and the conversation was the kind that moves fast and stays shallow, which suited me fine. I watched my son across the table. I watched his wife. I watched the way they passed dishes to me with careful consideration, the way they asked about my health twice, the way they mentioned my drive from the bus station in a tone that was almost clinical, documenting, The word she had used, I am not managing it responsibly. After the children went to bed, I told them I was tired from the trip and went upstairs to the guest room, and I sat on the edge of the guest bed and I called my attorney. Not Diane, mine. A man named Robert, who had been my outside counsel since the company had 20 employees and we could barely afford him. It was 10:15 at night. He answered on the second ring because that was the kind of attorney Robert was. I told him what I had heard. All of it. As precisely as I could remember it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Have you made any changes to the trust documents since Margaret passed?" "Some," I said. "Not the ones that matter. Do you want to make some now?" "I want to know my options first," I said. "And I want to know them before Thursday dinner." Robert talked for 20 minutes, and I listened and asked 3 questions and thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in the dark for a while, not doing anything, just being there in the quiet of the house with the rain still going outside and the furnace clicking and somewhere down the hall my grandchildren sleeping. Emma in her room with her lopsided ponytails undone now. Cooper with whatever animal he had to have in the bed with him this year. I had not earned $83 million to leave my grandchildren nothing. I had also not earned it to leave it to people who were building a legal case against me in their kitchen while I was standing in their hallway. Robert and I spoke again Thursday morning while my son was at the grocery store, and the children were watching the parade on television. We spoke for 40 minutes. When we were done, I made 2 phone calls that I will not detail here because they do not belong in this story except as outcome. What I will say is that by the time my son came back with the last of the groceries, certain things had changed, and certain things had been set in motion, and none of it would be visible until I chose to make it visible. Thanksgiving dinner was set for 2 in the afternoon. The neighbors came back, plus an additional couple, a man my son worked with and his wife, who had an anxious laugh and apologized often. There were 8 adults around the table and 2 children at the smaller table they had set up near the window for Emma and Cooper. My daughter-in-law had cooked beautifully. I gave her that without reservation. She was an excellent cook. My son stood to say grace and then proposed a toast, which surprised me because it was not something he usually did. He raised his glass and looked around the table, and then looked at me with what I now recognized as practiced warmth and said, "To family. To my dad, who made the trip all the way from Knoxville on the bus," and he paused there, and I heard it. The small opening for a laugh, the gentle frame of the harmless, eccentric old man, because that's the kind of stubborn, wonderful man he is. People laughed kindly. I smiled. "To family," I said, and drank. We ate. The food was good. The conversation moved around the table, and I participated when I was spoken to and listened when I was not. And twice I excused myself to check my phone, which my son watched me do with an expression he could not quite neutralize. He was watching for something. I knew what he was watching for. It was near the end of the meal, when the plates were being cleared and the pie was coming out, that the doorbell rang. My son frowned slightly. He had not invited anyone else. He went to the door. Robert did not look like a man who charged $400 an hour. He looked like someone's high school history teacher. Reading glasses on a lanyard, gray blazer, sensible shoes. He was 61 years old and he had a memory like a filing cabinet and a poker face that I had spent 30 years being grateful for. He stood in the doorway and said, "I'm sorry to interrupt your holiday. Harold asked me to stop by." I had not told my son I had invited him. I watched my son's face go carefully still. "This is your lawyer," my daughter-in-law said. "Not a question." "This is Robert." "Yes," I said. "I thought it might be a good time to discuss some things, since we're all together." I looked at my son. "Unless you'd rather the guests step out." The couple from the neighborhood looked at each other. The man my son worked with put down his fork. My son said, quietly, "Dad, I rode 9 hours on a bus to be here," I said. "I think I've earned 20 minutes. Robert sat in the chair that someone had the presence of mind to bring from the living room, and he opened the folder he carried, and he spoke in the measured, unhurried voice he used when he wanted to make absolutely certain that every word was understood the first time. He explained that 4 days before Thanksgiving, following a conversation I had overheard in the hallway of this house, I had made several amendments to the estate plan that Margaret and I had established in 2019. The primary trust, which held the majority of assets resulting from the sale of my company, had been restructured. The beneficiary designations for my son and daughter-in-law had been revised. In their place, an irrevocable educational trust had been established for Emma and Cooper, to be administered by Robert's firm until each grandchild reached the age of 25, with distributions available for education, healthcare, and documented needs, none of which required parental approval or access. The remainder, Robert explained, had been directed to 3 charitable foundations, one of which Margaret had established herself in 2016, which my daughter-in-law had described 2 days ago as a donor wall. A conservatorship or oversight petition, Robert said, still in that measured voice, would have no legal pathway to these assets. They are no longer in Harold's direct control. They are in trust, irrevocably. He looked up from the folder. I want to make sure that's clear. The table was very quiet. My daughter-in-law's face had done several things in the past 2 minutes and had arrived somewhere that was neither anger nor grief, but something between them, a kind of collapse. My son was looking at me. Just looking. He was not performing anything now. You heard us, he said. I was standing in your hallway with my bag, I said. I had just gotten off a 9-hour bus. He looked down at the table. One of the neighbors coughed quietly. The man from my son's office was very carefully examining his pie plate. Your children, I said, and my voice was steady because I had decided it would be, are going to be taken care of. Everything I built, the part that matters, the part for the future, goes to them, directly, without conditions and without you in the middle of it. I looked at my son. That was always the plan. That was always what your mother and I intended. Emma and Cooper. Not a house in Nashville. Not a German car. Emma and Cooper. He said nothing. The difference, I said, is that now there is a legal structure that does not depend on you treating me like I have lost my mind. My daughter-in-law stood up from the table. She walked to the kitchen and the door swung shut behind her, and no one at the table moved for a moment. Robert gathered his papers with the calm efficiency of a man who had done difficult things in rooms before and would do them again. He thanked everyone for their time, wished the table a happy Thanksgiving, and I walked him to the door. At the door, quietly, he said, Emma and Cooper are well provided for. I want you to know that. I know, I said. That's all I needed. I went back to the table, and I sat down and I picked up my fork and I ate my pie. It was a very good pie. Pecan, Margaret's favorite. I did not know if my daughter-in-law knew that, or if it was a coincidence. It did not matter. From the small table by the window, Emma was watching me with her grandmother's eyes. She had a smear of whipped cream on her chin. Grandpa, she said. Yes, sweetheart. Are you okay? I looked at her for a moment, at the lopsided ponytails and the whipped cream and the complete, uncomplicated love in that face, and I said, I am better than okay. After the guests had gone and the dishes were done and the children were in bed, my son came and found me on the back patio. I was sitting in one of the stone patio chairs he had mentioned 6 times on the phone, watching the last of the rain move through the yard under the porch light. He sat down in the chair beside me. We did not speak for a while. I don't know how we got here, he said finally. I thought about that. I thought about it honestly, the way Margaret would have wanted me to, without the comfort of simple answers. I think we got here slowly, I said. The way most things go wrong. Not in one moment. Over a lot of small ones. He nodded. He was quiet again. Then he said, the truck. The bus. I thought something was wrong. The truck was your mother's, I said. She learned to drive in that truck. I'm not getting rid of it because it makes financial sense. I looked at him. The bus was $11. I have the same $11 I had before I sold the company. That's the point. He did not say anything to that. I am not impaired, I said. I am not confused. I am not a problem to be managed. I am your father, and I am 64 years old, and I have 30 years left if I'm lucky, and I intend to spend them the way I choose, and give what I have to whom I choose. I paused. That includes you. If you decide you want a relationship with me, that is a real one. That is still available. He put his face in his hands. He was not crying, exactly, but he was close to it, and I let him be there without filling the silence, because sometimes silence is the only honest thing. After a while, he lifted his head and looked at the yard and said, Emma asks about you every week. I know, I said. She tells me. She keeps the last postcard you sent her on her mirror, the one with the mountains on it. I did not say anything to that because there was nothing to say that would not break something I was working hard to hold together. We sat on the stone patio in the cold Tennessee night, my son and I, and the rain had moved on and left behind a clean, dark sky and the smell of wet leaves, and somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something it had probably already forgotten. I did not fix everything that night. You cannot fix in a night what took years to bend. But I sat there, and I breathed, and I thought of Margaret, who had made me promise to stay close. And I thought that staying close did not always mean comfortable, and it did not always mean painless, but it meant present. I was present. I had ridden 9 hours on a bus to be present. That is not nothing. Before I went back inside, I said one more thing to my son, and I want to say it here too because it is the part that matters most. I said, whatever you think of the decisions I make with my money, understand this. The love was never conditional. Not for one day of your life. That part does not get restructured. That part stays exactly where it was. He did not answer me, but he reached out and put his hand on my arm the way he used to when he was young and afraid of something. And I put my hand over his and we sat there a while longer before the cold finally drove us in. The next morning, Emma woke up early and found me in the kitchen making coffee, and she climbed up on the counter stool and told me about her kindergarten teacher and the class hamster and the boy who sat behind her and always tapped her shoulder, and she talked for 20 minutes without stopping, and I drank my coffee and I listened to every single word. If you have ever driven through the night, or ridden the long way, or shown up tired and aching because someone you love was on the other end of the road, leave me a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. And if this story touched something in you, please subscribe to Voice of Daddy, because there are more stories where this one came from. Every one of them is about the things that matter when everything else falls away.